Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great event on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also happening at the end of today's webinar is a drawing for 6 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 6 lucky winners. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is a decade of DevOps, design patterns for future-proofing your DevOps strategy. Our speakers today are Jay Lyman, who is the principal analyst at Cloud Native and DevOps Research. Hi, Jay. How are you? Welcome to join. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely.
Great. We also have Lorelei Catapin, who is the Senior Director of Product Management at JFrog. Hey, Lorelei. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Charlene. Thank you. My pleasure.
All right, Jay. Well, I know you're going to be the first one speaking, so I'm going to put myself on mute and take myself off camera and let you get right to it.
Great. Thanks very much, Charlene. Thanks, Lorelei, and thanks to our viewers for joining us today. Just to go over some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in the first portion of this webinar. It has been 10 years since DevOps sort of arrived in the enterprise, and we have seen dramatic changes in the trend over those 10 years. So I'm going to go touch on those, present a few data points on it, and try to put things into context about what those changes mean and what some of the dynamics that are changing in the DevOps trend. One of the biggest changes that we've seen is the sort of top-down adoption of DevOps. It very much used to be a grassroots, developer-driven trend when it began, and now we see much more involvement from central IT teams and also from executive management and leadership. I guess the other thing to mention here is that DevOps has sort of been, there's a strong connection to digital transformation, and DevOps is often seen as a starting point or a building block for digital transformation, and that's part of that top-down adoption, which sort of changes the objectives and some of the advantages, but it's one of the biggest changes that we've seen in DevOps. We've also seen movement to the cloud. I'll present some data on how DevOps, which today lives mostly in on-premises and private cloud environments, is increasingly being implemented in public cloud, PaaS, and SaaS settings. I'll also talk about the stakeholder spread and how DevOps adoption, as it moves through an organization, it involves additional stakeholders, and we'll go over who some of those folks are. One example of that is the DevSecOps trend, where we see security teams and security elements integrated with DevOps releases. And also we see heavy use of cloud native software, such as containers and Kubernetes and serverless among DevOps teams. Similar to what we've seen with security, we're starting to see more integration of artificial intelligence and machine learning. We have a data point on that, and then we'll talk about how organizations are measuring improving their DevOps success. So to start off, obviously DevOps is primarily about speed, and we do see a quickening pace of software releases. And just to set the table on the data points that I'm presenting today, most of these are from the Voice of the Enterprise DevOps workloads and key projects survey that we did in Q1 of this year. It represents more than 500 web surveys, and it's primarily North America. And I think, while DevOps kind of does represent so many different things, particularly after 10 years in the enterprise, it's still sort of centrally about speed. And this chart sort of illustrates how we've seen things moving toward those faster timelines, much more hourly, daily, and weekly releases compared to when DevOps arrived on the scene, and we saw lots of quarterly and semi-annual and monthly releases. We expect these timelines to keep increasing and shortening. And I guess another point, not surprisingly, the older the company, when we cut this across the age of the company, the older the company, the less likely their DevOps releases center on hourly, daily, or weekly timelines. And I think that speaks to the difficulty of changing processes and culture that might have existed in an organization for years or decades. But yeah, DevOps is definitely speeding up software releases. This is kind of an interesting data point. And as I mentioned, we do see DevOps moving to the cloud. Our survey shows how DevOps is moving away from on-premises and private cloud deployments and more toward SaaS, IaaS, public cloud, and also PaaS as primary DevOps environments. We also see, this is happening as SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS providers are also more loudly and aggressively addressing the DevOps market. So that's also driving this trend. I think the other point I would make here is that while we see the on-premises deployment of DevOps diminishing, it's not going away. And that means that we'll probably continue to see lots of hybrid cloud, where on-prem and public cloud architectures are used, as well as we're starting to see the beginning of multi-cloud deployments, where organizations are leveraging more than one public cloud. So continued growth of the hybrid and multi-cloud trends. And this isn't really to make IT operators, central IT admins, DevOps teams' lives more difficult. This is because there are different infrastructures that are right for different applications and services. And I'd also note that we do sometimes see a single application drawing on multiple infrastructures, maybe for backup and DR. But really, when we're talking about hybrid and multi-cloud, it's across the breadth of application portfolios. So across all of a company's different teams and applications and initiatives, that's where they're wanting to use these different infrastructures in sort of a best execution venue approach, whereby the workloads run on the most appropriate infrastructure based on factors such as cost, performance, data sovereignty, or geographic location, or other things. Sometimes it's the special capabilities of the different platforms that are available. But definitely a mix of infrastructures in play for DevOps. A little bit more on the stakeholders. Obviously DevOps does sort of start with the developers and the IT operations teams. But if it's working properly, as it sort of spreads across the company, it will pull in additional stakeholders and teams who, we see, again, more evidence of that top-down adoption of DevOps. And so management and leadership in this survey, our most recent survey, was listed as the primary stakeholder beyond devs and ops that's involved. In our first survey that we did last year on this, we saw security were the top stakeholders beyond devs and ops involved. And here again, we see central IT admin. This was somewhat surprising to me, and I think traditional IT administrators aren't who come to mind when people think about DevOps. But I think this is indicative that organizations are interested in making sure that their DevOps is not only fast, but it's also sanctioned by the organization, secure and compliant. And so DevOps teams are increasingly working with these central IT admins. And they'll go to the sort of networking admin or the storage admin, say, here's what we're doing with our DevOps deployment. How can you play a role and help? And sometimes the organization is able to respond to that. I think that's the that's the preferred scenario. But the DevOps teams aren't willing to sort of wait around very long for that to happen. So if the organization can't provide the collaboration or the input from the central IT admins, the DevOps teams will sort of go ahead and do it themselves, write their own security framework, hire their own networking admin. We hear stories of that happening too. There's also additional stakeholders that are involved. Line of business managers and product managers are big. One of our previous surveys had the data science and data analytics teams involved, and we see DBAs there as well. There's a category of stakeholder that was notoriously left out of the DevOps process up until I think a few years ago. So we're seeing a growing role for all of these different stakeholders, and I would expect, as we see more DevOps sort of spread across, wider swaths of application portfolios and more broadly across enterprises, we'll continue to see this sort of stakeholder spread. And we're seeing the same things happening when that we had with DevSecOps and the involvement of security teams. Now we're seeing things like data ops and the involvement of those data science teams. So the other stakeholders are a big part of this, and also a big change, I think. When DevOps, began, it was really about just the developers and the IT operations teams, and now we're seeing a lot more involvement from other parties. This is just to sort of illustrate where we are as the DevSecOps trend evolves, and this continues to sort of go up. The number of DevOps workflows with security elements. We've been tracking this since last year. A year ago, this was about 10 points down at 53% of organizations, including security elements in their DevOps releases, or at least half of their DevOps releases. So a year ago, it was sort of a glass half empty, half full, depending on how you view it. Maybe somewhat alarming that half of releases are going out, half or more were going out without any security elements. But we do see this. We see not only are is security a number of different security elements, vulnerability testing, source code analysis, API firewalls. We see a greater variety of the security tools that are being integrated. And they're also being integrated earlier into DevOps release processes. And I think there's sort of a few things that are driving this. One, the idea that security is just going to slow developers down is becoming sort of an antiquated view. And I think there's an appreciation today that software security is tied to software quality. And that's something that software developers care about, quality. So we're speaking to developers in a language that they understand when we talk about quality. And it is, quality is very connected to security. Two, I think the security providers, vendors are doing a pretty decent job of making sure that these tools aren't burdensome or onerous to development teams. So making sure that the security tooling that we're adding to the release process is automated and integrated. And third, the third thing driving this DevSecOps trend is the sort of black eyes of incidents and breaches, high-profile breaches in particular, that sort of remind everyone pretty regularly that they need to reduce risk and to do what they can to secure software pipelines. We also see cloud-native technologies and methodologies as a critical part of DevOps and application development and deployment today. I say technologies and methodologies, mainly for microservices, which is more of a methodology than a technology. But that was sort of the deemed the most critical to app dev and deployment, microservices, that is. And I think that this is sort of where a lot of organizations start their use of cloud native software, moving away from monolithic applications and getting toward microservices, taking advantage of containers. And we also see when I'm talking to organizations about their use of cloud native technologies, whether it's containers and microservices or Kubernetes or serverless, I'm typically talking to DevOps teams. They seem to be the ones implementing cloud native software inside the enterprise. And so it's a key part of what DevOps are doing. And we've seen in previous surveys that cloud native is ranked fairly important as a factor for cloud native. And we see well more than half of DevOps applications are developed using cloud native tools and technology. And similar to what we saw with security, we're seeing a similar thing with the integration of artificial intelligence and machine learning, sometimes referred to as AI ops, if we need another buzzword. But we're seeing some substance to the sort of sizzle around AI ops, and we do see a good number of organizations here. I think we see that are in either the execution or evaluation stage with integrating ML models with application development. So we see, nearly 3/4 of companies are in that evaluation or execution phase, we also see other signs, the importance of data analytics and data science. We're increasingly hearing about sort of data science use cases, crossing over with DevOps use cases. And so again, just like we see with security, I would expect to see more of this kind of integration. And there's some interesting things happening whereby we're integrating AI and and ML and sort of using some of the data that we collect, the massive amounts of data that we can collect that's spinning off some of our application releases and infrastructure management, using that to improve things. And that's very much in line with sort of DevOps tenets. And so also, considering how organizations measure and prove the value of DevOps, I think this is interesting because we sort of see here evidence of this growing business focus of DevOps, not just about technology, not just about the culture, but really about business. And it's kind of interesting to see again the cadence, the timelines for software releases are increasing, but it's interesting to me to see frequency of releases here as the last metric. And organizations are still looking at these technical metrics, things like quality or performance, but we see their business level metrics, things like digital user experience, customer satisfaction. That's a growing metric for measuring how well your DevOps is working. And again, we saw the line of business managers among another category of stakeholders beyond devs and IT ops that are involved. And so we sort of see more of the business objective intersecting with DevOps as well. I guess also when you sort of look into one of the crosscuts here, the organizations with the DevOps deployments of 5 years or more are more focused on some of these business level metrics, as well as efficiency of sysadmins, crisis recovery, and culture metrics, compared to their counterparts who've deployed DevOps for 1 to 2 years. So I think this sort of shows the longer the deployment, the more factors that go into measuring and improving success, including these business objectives. So we've had sort of 10 years. What might we expect in the next 10 years of DevOps? Definitely think it's not going away. But I guess, the speed and the efficiency advantages and benefits of DevOps, I think are pretty well established. But readiness, flexibility to respond to changes in the market, and sort of readiness for what's next, whether it's a new technology, whether it's something your competitor does, or whether it's a global event like this pandemic, along the lines of which we've never seen before. That readiness is a key part, and I think that will become increasingly important. And the pandemic and resulting economic conditions have illustrated, and the market changes that have come from that, have illustrated sort of this need and the benefit of being ready for any kind of change. We also expect, again, that movement from on-prem and private cloud to more public cloud, multi-cloud use, as well as SaaS and PaaS. But again, the on-prem doesn't just go away. A lot of the organization's CI/CD processes are pretty tied to on-premises deployments. So I think we'll continue to see use of hybrid and multi-cloud architectures that run applications across all these different infrastructures. We're also seeing the edge and IoT emerge as yet maybe another category of hybrid cloud or multi-cloud. But that's a growing use case category for both DevOps and for cloud native. There's some nice alignment of cloud native capabilities and edge. So that's emerging as another part of hybrid and multi-cloud. The DevSecOps trend, we talked about it quite a bit, but I think this is going to continue. Security and compliance are always priorities for enterprise organizations, and I think we'll continue to see the shift left of more security tooling earlier in the software release processes, and that's a good thing. We talked also about how AI and ML and data is playing a bigger role in DevOps, and data analytics applications are already among the top type of applications released in a DevOps manner. So I expect we'll see even greater role for data in the software release processes and for data analytics, data science teams, DBAs to be involved in DevOps. We also see a broader swath of applications. This is sort of happening in DevOps and in cloud native, to where used to be limited mainly to web and stateless applications that were being containerized. And we're starting to see organizations containerizing stateful applications. This is being helped along by technical advances such as persistent data volumes support in Kubernetes, but this is also being driven by sort of the demand side and organizations that want to release a greater number of applications in a DevOps manner, that want to be able to containerize a broader class of applications, including traditional existing and legacy applications as well. I think we'll continue to see additional stakeholders involved, and again, as we go through sort of the pandemic and the economic conditions that have resulted, you may see those finance people playing a bigger role in DevOps, and sort of not only providing the investment in DevOps, but sort of analyzing the return on investment, and taking sort of an ROI approach to DevOps as opposed to a TCO, total cost of ownership. We're seeing that shift. That's sort of coming with that alignment with business objectives as well, and that's sort of the last point. I think as we move forward, business will play an even greater role in DevOps releases and in how organizations are approaching their application development and deployment. So with that, I think I'm ready to hand it over to Lorelei, and I will be here for questions and to follow up at the end. Lorelei,
All right.
over to you.
Thank you so much, Jay. That was very insightful. I'd like to first go ahead and provide a quick intro to JFrog before I move on to the relevant content. So JFrog was founded in 2008, going to market with Artifactory, the world's first artifact binary repository manager. This was initially an open source project. Since then, JFrog has continuously expanded horizontally across the DevOps platform. Currently, JFrog has about 5,600 paying customers. 65% of the Fortune 100 companies are among those customers. They span a range of enterprise companies through various verticals. So we see about 150 new customers being added on a monthly basis, and we see that there are about 2 billion downloads per month across our central repositories, and this includes your Maven packages, your Go modules, the Conan C++ packages, your homebrew packages, and also those packages for the Android framework development. So from an enterprise usage perspective, we see about 3 million developers across our customers logging into the platform on a daily basis, and some through the UI, some through the APIs and the CLIs. We also have a large team of developers, relations, and evangelists that are helping the community to scale up and adopt the DevOps best practices. And last, we're a DevOps unicorn. All right, so here's a high-level diagram of the unified JFrog platform. The first is Artifactory. It allows us for a centralized repository across your organization where developers can store all types of packages, including container images also. Artifactory can be called the database of DevOps, wherein the building blocks of your software are stored and those components and packages. And this includes also the metadata information about the packages that make up your software. And then there's X-Ray, which is our DevSecOps solution, which we introduced back in 2016. X-Ray scans binaries for security vulnerabilities as well as license compliance. It's also universal in that it supports many different package types. It's also integrated across the entire platform. Then we have distribution, which allows you to bundle your software into one release bundle, and then also distribute them to those edge nodes, whether that's in your production sites or your data centers or the various regions in the cloud or multi-cloud, which Jay had mentioned. A lot of applications are now moving on to the cloud as well, or even for your IoT devices that run your software. Then we have the pipelines, which recently went GA earlier this year. It's our next-gen CI/CD orchestration tool. It's an outcome of us acquiring Shippables a year ago. And then pipelines allows you to automate and also orchestrate the end-to-end pipeline from code to production. And then last, we have Mission Control, which provides insights of your platform, your pipelines. And so you can consume this entire platform anywhere from open source, community edition, on-prem or hybrid, as well as our SaaS solution. All right, so as you know, almost everything now runs on software. We all rely on software on a daily basis, and sometimes the software that you rely on is very much mission critical, and it needs to always be available. So one could say life is the new runtime. So as software becomes part of our lives, enterprise companies are finding that they need to future-proof their DevOps processes in order to keep up with the rapid growth of technology today. And then these DevOps processes need to allow them to scale and support your entire organization. As Jay had mentioned, now more and more teams are starting to be relevant for the DevOps framework and DevOps solution. All right, so what we've heard from enterprise customers is that having a centralized end-to-end solution while providing the freedom of choice across their organizations has been very important to their success in driving their DevOps transformation. So from listening to our enterprise customers, we've identified some key considerations towards future-proofing their DevOps solution. And I'd like to share with you what those key considerations are that we've found. So the first key consideration here is really future-proofing your DevOps strategy. And that means unifying the central management of the end-to-end delivery process and outcomes. And this really comes down to managing in one central location, both your process as well as the outcome of that process. So in other words, artifacts are the building blocks of your software, and they make up the outcome of your CI/CD processes. And it's important to have very much granular visibility of these building blocks from development all the way down to your production. And this also allows for your consistency and traceability throughout your pipeline. This concept of having a unified process and outcome, it's really important because a lot of tools these days would let you do one but not the other. Here, an example of this are some of the legacy CI tools out there where it allows you to kind of daisy chain your processes, but it doesn't really provide you much visibility on the outcome of those processes. So with an end-to-end solution of your DevOps process and tool sets, this really provides visibility across your software lifecycle. It also improves your velocity, your quality, the governance of your applications, and so forth. Also, having a centralized secure management of your tools that span from code to production. This includes, of course, your binary management, your container registries, security scanning, delivery and distribution, as well as the CI/CD orchestration tool. This allows you to avoid the need for the context switching between different tools. So you'll see in my demo later that the JFrog platform provides that end-to-end solution. It provides a central universal solution that can support different types of technologies, whether that's Maven, Docker, or anything in between, and allows the developers the freedom of choice on what technology they need to use. It also allows you to have the visibility and traceability at every single stage of your pipeline. All right, so the second key consideration is incorporating that DevSecOps into your solution and shifting left both in security and compliance. So as Jay mentioned, security is becoming more and more in a rise. So today we know that 60 to 80% of our application code is comprised of open source or third-party components. And we know that application vulnerabilities is the #1 source of external attacks and breaches. So earlier I mentioned that these days we're experiencing an explosion of software. Software companies are producing more and more artifacts, especially for those microservices-based applications. So, and these applications could contain hundreds of container images, which might, contain like these third-party components, open source components, and on top of that, the organizations have to face the challenges of having less and less time to react to these vulnerability attacks. So because of security testing and scanning becoming sometimes a challenge, they oftentimes get pushed towards the end of your software development lifecycle. So we need to shift left with security and have the tools that allows us to do so. And one that basically have tight integration with the rest of your DevOps ecosystem, which includes your IDE. All right, so the third key consideration for future-proofing your DevOps strategy is about supporting both the cloud native as well as the legacy applications in one single solution. So modernization is on the rise, as Jay had mentioned, but we also know that we still need to support both the modern architecture and the legacy systems through one unified solution to avoid some context switching. So with that, you'll want the ability to plug in, the best of breed tools for each of these stack of technology. So for example, maybe when you're building a cloud native microservice, you'll need an easy way to deploy to Kubernetes. Whereas with the legacy-based application, you may need to easily deploy on a standard VM environment. So with that in mind, having a DevOps platform that allows you to build and deploy both a cloud native as well as legacy application is very important in your DevOps solution. The fourth key consideration is providing flexibility for your hybrid anything. As Jay mentioned, hybrid is also on the rise, either on-prem, on the cloud, and of course both. So what I mean by this is that your process and tools need to support and integrate with any technology, and that includes your point tools, process, infrastructure, and so forth. And this is because we know that the future, we don't know what the future may bring. We don't know, and modern software developments move at a very fast pace. Sometimes it can be very maddening to follow this pace. And you'll want to be able to easily support the different types of applications in different technology stacks. So you also want to be able to easily plug in additional ecosystem tools, as well as different environments and different processes. So by leveraging a multi-cloud approach, you'll ensure your processes and tools are vendor agnostic to avoid that vendor lock-in. All right, so the next key consideration is your DevOps as a service at scale. So, though we need to allow for that flexibility, you'll also want to allow and promote those compliance and the standardization to avoid having everything becoming a Snowflake workflow or Snowflake configuration. So one of the key attributes of this is really thinking holistically about your entire DevOps ecosystem. And this involves, taking into consideration your company-wide processes and tools. At the same time, we need to allow for flexibility and agility for the needs of each of your teams. So you may be wondering, what exactly do I mean? So one example is that's often faced by enterprise organizations is the need to onboard new development teams into an existing DevOps process and tool. So, and in these cases, you'll want to leverage a set of standardized DevOps solutions so that you can quickly onboard the team and avoid the team from having to cobble together their own DevOps process and infrastructure from scratch every single time. So large enterprise organizations need to support thousands of concurrent pipelines, applications, developers, and these organizations can't really afford to have each team have their own unique workflow and configuration. And the last key consideration for your DevOps strategy is really ensuring developers are happy. To me, developers are king. They're the expert to lead the DevOps transformation and adoption at scale. For developers to start off as you build it, then you build it, then you test it. And then you build it, you test it, you run it. And now is you build it, you test it, you run it, and you secure it. So as a developer, you now have these responsibilities across the software lifecycle. And in order to be successful, we need to take into consideration the needs and the workflows that will empower our developers. So for example, release managers or operations roles, they typically prefer to use the UI, but developers will tend to prefer using the APIs or declarative code or the CLIs and the likes. A good example actually of this is making your pipelines as code, storing them in source control. And the ability to define these pipelines as code makes them very much reusable. So you'll want to support and cater to all types of roles that are part of your DevOps solution. So at JFrog, we're always about solving the pain of our customers. And when talking with our customers, these are some of the things that they're expressing, which are addressed by some of the key considerations that I just talked about. Example, though security is important, it's a pain to incorporate across the various stages of their pipelines. Developers and DevOps teams are spending too much time kind of babysitting and managing their tool chain and those CI scripts, and less time being innovative and productive. Development teams don't always have full visibility of the health of their software from a security perspective until it actually makes it into your production or your runtime environment, and that's sometimes too late. Building pipelines for modern-based applications with microservices isn't actually all that simple, depending on the tools that you're using. And last, those that build their DevOps strategy based on a specific cloud provider made it very difficult to support a multi-cloud approach. So I want you to consider these pain points as I go through the demo and show how the JFrog Unified Platform addresses these pain points. All right, so with that, I'm going to go and switch to my demo environment. All right. So this is the UI of the unified JFrog platform. It provides one single pane of glass across the platform. Here you'll see the topology map. This provides all of the platform deployments that I have across the globe. The lines represents the direction of the replication or the synchronization between the platforms. On the trends part, I can see trends on storage, distribution, replication, and even X-ray scanning. And then at the heart of the platform is Artifactory. This is the packages view. It provides a central view of all of the packages and the binaries that are stored in Artifactory, along with the metadata information for each of the packages, such as whether it's been scanned by X-ray, the license information, number of versions, number of downloads. When I drill down into one of these packages, this one's an NPM package. Depending on the type of the package that I'm looking at, it'll give me relevant information. So with this NPM package, it's giving me the NPM install instruction, giving me the README information. Of course, I get information coming from X-ray, the number of violations, whether there's any security vulnerabilities, the license information, and so forth. Now moving on to the build. So this is a central view of all of the build infos that are published into Artifactory. And these build infos include important information of the build. So let's go into this, one of the builds. So it gives me what are the published modules that are part of this build, the environment variables that were used as part of this build, the dependencies, which is inside this JSON file. I can also diff this build. So for example, in case the build failed and I want to compare it with a previous version of the build, so I can see what actually changed. So I can see by artifacts, dependencies, or environment variables. So here when I'm diffing, I'm seeing that there are additional environment variables that were added to this build. All right, so on the artifacts view, this is the list of all of the repositories as well as the artifacts inside each of the repositories in Artifactory. I'll drill down into one of the Docker registries. Let's look in the Docker Dev Local Docker registry, the Docker app, Docker image into this tag. And here it shows you all of the relevant metadata information, the effective permissions, meaning what users and groups have access to this Docker image, information coming from X-ray. So this one, it looks like X-ray has a policy defined that's actually blocking this Docker image from being pulled or downloaded. So here you have the list of the violations, the list of the security vulnerabilities. We can look in one of these vulnerabilities. So here on the left side is a summary of that vulnerability. As you can see here, actually there is a fixed version for this component. So if I wanted to remediate this component, I can change the version that I'm using for this Docker image so that it doesn't have this vulnerability. Additional information about this vulnerability, the package type of the component, a summary of that vulnerability, the severity level, the actual CVE, even some references along with it. On the right side, it shows me how this component is related to this Docker image. This one is the Maven component, which is inside the jar file, which is inside this Docker layer, which is inside this Docker image. Now, you may want to do some impact analysis, meaning what are the other packages or Docker images that contain this component? So I can go and drill down into this particular component, look at the ancestors tab, and see what other packages include this particular component. So as you can see with the packages view, I mentioned the key consideration of having a unified process and outcome, and JFrog platform allows this, is having one single end-to-end DevOps solution for your organization. Because of the universality of the platform, there's no need for your users and developers to have to context switch between the different tools. All right, so moving on to distribution. This is a central view of all of the release bundles that have been created. So release bundles group together the artifacts that are part of your release, and they provide the bill of materials basically for your software releases. Another important thing to note about release bundles is that they're immutable and they're secure. So if I wanted to drill down into one of these release bundles, look at one of the versions, here's the artifacts that are included in this release bundle. What are the builds that are associated to this release bundle? Also, again, information coming from X-ray and so forth. All right, so I'm gonna skip pipelines for a bit. I'm gonna go on to X-ray, which is our DevSecOps solution. With X-ray, you can define policies and watches. So here's a centralized view of all of the policies that are defined. So policies enable you to create a set of rules in which each rule defines a security or license criteria. It also allows you to define a corresponding set of actions according to your organization needs. So within a policy, you define a rule. So you first define the criteria that you're interested in, whether that's a minimal severity, low, medium, high, or you're looking at a range of CVSS score. And then you define the actual action depending on when this criteria is actually triggered. So in addition to generating a violation, you can trigger a webhook. So you can trigger other third-party services such as Jira or Slack and so forth. You can notify a list of recipients that is interested in this violation, notify the deployer of the package that has this violation. So here, because X-Ray is integrated with the rest of the platform, it knows what user or agent actually deployed each of the artifacts inside Artifactory. You can notify also a list of email addresses and send an email to those regarding this violation. You can also block the download. So block the download of a specific package that has this violation. You can block the distribution of a release bundle that has this violation. And also you can fail a build that has dependencies that have this violation. All right, moving on to watches. So, policies are enforced when you apply them to watches. So in other words, you select the various resources, whether that's repositories, builds, or release bundles, and then you specify the actual policies that you'd like to apply on these resources. All right, so now I'm going to move on to a bit more of that shifting left using IDE. So let me switch my share to the VS Code. All right. So this is my VS Code. It just has a simple Go project. So with the IDE integration, we also have integration with IntelliJ, Eclipse, as well as Visual Studio. So here, what I'm showing you is it's integrated with X-Ray. This is the dependencies. The lines represent basically those that are vulnerable. So the components that are vulnerable. If I hover on them, it'll give me additional information about the vulnerability. I can click on this icon, show dependencies and tree, get more information about the component, also and more information about the security vulnerabilities. Here I can see that it's being fixed. It's actually fixed in the version 0.13. So I can, in my IDE, remediate this component by changing the version of my component to 0.13 to eliminate that vulnerability. All right, so I talked about DevSecOps also in my presentation and shifting left as a best practice. And here you'll see that with X-Ray being integrated with the rest of the platform, developers are being kept in mind. And that's whether you're looking at a package or a build or a release bundle, or even your IDE. And X-Ray provides that awareness of your security as well as your license compliance across the different stages of your pipeline. And at the end, your developers are pretty much happier because they have that integration in order to be able to shift left with your security. All right, so moving back to my demo. All right, so now we're going to move on to pipelines. So before I dive into the actual pipelines here, I'm going to talk a little bit more about these guys. So and these are different concepts and entities or artifacts that are centrally managed within the platform. The first one is integrations, and this provides a centralized dashboard to manage all of the secrets across your organization. So an integration allows your pipelines to be able to connect with any external service or tools such as GitHub, Jenkins, or many others. And it provides out of the box different types of integrations for you. So here, for example, we support many different integration types. If there's not one that you can find, you can just click on the generic integration. So with each integration, you can define the secrets that are associated with this integration. You can also scope this integration by pipelines or by teams. So maybe only certain production pipelines can have access to a specific integration with that specific secrets. All right, so moving on to pipeline sources. So, actually, the other thing I wanted to talk about integrations is that when let's say you have to recycle secrets. When you're recycling secrets, you'd like to do that in one central location, and that way, all of the other pipelines and all of the other tools that are using this integration will be reflected, and you only have to change this once. All right, now moving on to the pipeline sources. So all of the pipelines that are defined in code in a YAML file, and they're in a declarative syntax, and they're stored in a Git repository, such as GitHub or Bitbucket. And you import these pipeline definitions through the pipeline sources. So when you make a commit in your pipeline definition in your source control, it'll automatically get synced through your pipeline sources. And then the third one is node pools. So this provides a centralized dashboard to manage all of the node pools that can be used across your organization. Node pools provide a convenient way to basically logically group the nodes where your pipeline steps run. So you can group your nodes either by operating system, by the size of the machine. Maybe you have some jobs that need bigger machines, bigger CPUs, or you can also group them by teams, meaning you'll be able to actually manage your quota based on your build infrastructure. You can also define dynamic or static node pools. So static node pools are basically those build nodes that are persistently available, and your dynamic nodes are those that are spun up and torn down on demand by your pipelines. And this also helps manage your infrastructure costs by not necessarily incurring charges on those idle nodes. Okay, now let's move on to your pipelines. So here, I'm gonna focus on three different pipelines, which represents three different teams. The first one is the application team that has two components in that application, the front end and the back end. The other one represents the team that's building the Go service that lives alongside the application. And then you have the release management team that basically bundles the application and the Go service into one and allows the release management team to be able to distribute and deliver that to the various production and edge nodes. All right, so let's go on to the demo application. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, so here the squares represents the steps, and then the circles represents the resources, whether that's resources being consumed by a step or being produced by a step. So a step basically is a unit of execution in the pipeline, and it can be triggered by an event via an input resource or by an actual step. And there's generic step, which allows for those general purpose execution. For this, we have Bash or PowerShell that we support. And then we have the native step, which are built in and come out of the box with pipelines. So some examples of those are pushing a Docker image into Artifactory or publishing and promoting your build infos and so forth. So on this one, this is representing a GitHub repository, which includes the source code for the front end. And then this one is representing the GitHub repository, which includes the source code for the back end. So as you can see in this pipeline, it has multiple trigger points. So meaning there are multiple repositories, source repositories that can trigger this one pipeline, whether it's a change in the back end or a change in the front end. So what this is doing, this step is actually using a generic step, and this generic step will allow you to be able to again, run any kind of legacy scripts or Python scripts. In this case, this is actually creating a Docker image that includes the back end and the front end, and then publishing that the build info that's associated to that Docker image. This is the output resource of the build, which is a build info. We're then promoting that build info, and the outcome of that is a promoted build info. So something about the resources is that they're global across the pipelines. And because of that, they also provide a way to be able to link the pipelines. I'm going to quickly fast forward to the demo release management pipeline. So what you can see here is, you've got two input resources. This one is the output resource of one of the pipelines, and this one is the output resource of the other pipeline. And what this step is doing is creating a release bundle, and then output is a release bundle. It's signing the release bundle, and then eventually distributing that release bundle. So, one of the key considerations that I mentioned is providing your DevOps as a service at scale. And here you can see that the JFrog pipelines enables this principle as well. So providing a continuous collaboration among the teams, whether that's developers or release management teams. And at the same time, it allows these teams to quickly ramp up using a centralized set of resources and integrations. And last, with the JFrog platform, it provides your DevOps teams full visibility of your DevOps pipelines, but it still allows for that flexibility among your teams, regardless of what tools you're using. So with that, I conclude my demo.
All right, great. We're about 5 minutes to the top of the hour, so I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 quick questions here. So let's go ahead and dive right on into those. Let's see, what is the biggest hurdle for enterprise DevOps adoption that we hear? Jay, maybe you could take that one.
Yeah, I could take that, and Lorelei can weigh in with her thoughts. I think skills and experience seems to be a big challenge for organizations. A lot of times when organizations deploy DevOps, they'll bring in sort of a champion or a team of people to sort of lead the effort. But as I said, organizations are always keen on sort of spreading that across more teams and applications. And I think that a lot of times they run into difficulty finding the right, the people with the skills and the talent. So there's a big demand for DevOps talent, and I think that's a big challenge for organizations.
Yeah, I also want to add, thanks, Jay. I absolutely agree. The other thing I think is also a hurdle is culture, and that changing that mindset among the people. Sometimes you get, those that are resisting the change, and this can be a challenge as well.
Yeah, good old resistance to change and enterprise IT inertia. It's always an issue. It's a good point.
All right. Let's see if we can get one more in. Let's see. When you say this one is for you, Jay. When you say release, do you mean go live or simply deploy to production? Because these are not the same thing.
I'd probably say release to production. That's sort of the benchmark that we use and we see, I think it was about 90% of organizations that have deployed software to production in the last year have either some or full DevOps deployments across their entire IT organization. So I guess the point is that DevOps has kind of become synonymous with enterprise software releases. But yeah, I'm referring to production.
Okay. All right, great. So we're 2 minutes to the top of the hour. So unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for questions. But please, if we didn't get to your question, I apologize. But please know that the folks at JFrog will be getting a copy of all of the questions that came in. And I'm sure somebody from the organization will be more than happy to follow up with you offline and get your question answered. I know at the top of the hour I did mention that we'd be doing a drawing for 6 $25 Amazon gift cards. So let's get that done real quick before we close things out. Our winners for the $25 Amazon gift cards today are, let's see, David A. Congratulations, David. Gil B. Congratulations, Gil. Jason G. Congratulations, Jason. Leslie B, congratulations, Leslie. Ronald F, congratulations, Ronald. And last, Robin G. Congratulations, Robin. We'll be following up with all of you offline by email to get your $25 Amazon gift card over to you. So please check your email. And also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. Following today's webinar, we are sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website. So you can always go look for it there. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Jay, Lorelei, thank you both so much for your time today. Great presentation. I always love to see the demos too. Those are lots of fun to watch. So yeah, great. So, Yeah, and great insight from 451. So thanks to you both. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks for
Also
having
want
me.
to thank yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.